Can you all see it? Hopefully you can all see it fine. If there is any problem, let me know either by intervening or through the chat. So Martin, we are now on slide 1 with titles, and please continue.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. So I'm Martin Robb. I'm with the NDA, which is the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority within the UK government. On slide 1, you can see the heading is Nadal Overview. That acronym stands for the NDA Archive Limited. So we've actually created a special company to actually operate our archive. So moving on to slide 2, please, Marta. So a quick overview of the actual organisation of the NDA. It's a non-departmental government body, so effectively we're part of the UK government, set up in 2005, and we own all state-owned civil nuclear facilities. They've all been transferred under our ownership, and they cover nuclear research facilities, fuel production facilities, and fuel reprocessing facilities, as well as 10 Magnox power stations, which are all now decommissioned. In other words, they've been turned off. We have no MOD facilities or military facilities in the estate. We spend about £3 billion a year cleaning up the nuclear legacy from the 1940s to the present day. We've estimated that we're going to finish in around about 2120, and that date is only there because that's the date the computer program finished. The calendar and the computer programs don't go beyond that date, so we are actually going beyond that date. As an organisation, we have 300 people working directly within the central function NDA, but across all the production facilities across the estate, we have about 10,000 staff and around about 15,000 contractors. So that's the size of the organisation. Can we move on to slide 3, please, Marta? So how does the NDA operate? We actually publish a strategy, which you can find on the government websites, which articulates how we're going to take apart the nuclear legacy from the 1940s to the present day. There are some key strategies in there. The 4 key strategies are how we will deal with uranium, how we will deal with plutonium and spent fuel together. The remaining 2 strategies deal with waste that is arising, and the final key strategy is about how we're going to clean the sites up. But against those strategies, there's a whole host of other strategies that support the delivery of that mission. And information governance is one of those key strategies. So you can see the mission statement we have is to optimize business value from our knowledge and information assets in a compliant, secure, and sustainable manner. Only investing in those things that we need to. We get a lot of pressure from people to invest in a whole range of ancillary areas, so it's very important to keep targeting on the key mission. And if you'll notice, there's 2 things that we have to focus on: knowledge, and what we mean by knowledge is what's in your head, as opposed to information, which is what's usually documented and written down. And my role is to try and bring the 2 together so that we can increase the value associated with that. This isn't on the slide at the moment, but we started the program, which is, as I've just articulated there, the Information Governance Program, IGP, in 2015, and we had nothing. So in 2015, we managed to put together the strategy, put together our plans, get approval for the plans, which were in excess of £100 million, and we started the design and build of the archive from 2015, and we opened the archive in late 2017. And we've now been trying for the last 3 years to start populating the archive with records from the estate. So as we're populating the records from the estate into the archive, the key benefit of why we managed to get £100 million was if we do not have records associated with the waste, the nuclear waste, we cannot move it, we cannot safely store it, and we cannot safely dispose of it into a burial facility below ground. So if you think of the NDA as now as a production factory, our role is to take existing nuclear material and convert it into a product which is a waste package, a container with the waste in it that we can now bury. We need the quality records associated with that production cycle. When we have those, we then got confidence of the community, the country, and we can actually then dispose of the waste. Without the record, we will not be able to handle and manage that waste and dispose of it. I'll come to the timeframes in a few minutes on that. The other key issue we have is once we've actually dealt with the waste, we have nuclear sites where the power stations were and the facilities were that we need to clean up. And we need to be able to demonstrate to whoever takes over that land in the future that we've cleaned it to a particular standard. We need to demonstrate that. And again, that's where the records come in. So without the records, we can't actually demonstrate that we've actually cleaned the land up appropriately for its next use. So they are the two key drivers for the archive and having these records. Behind that, there's a whole host of other drivers, such as complying with the law, complying with legal requirements, legislation, statutory requirements, and international obligations. There's an OSPAR agreement between the UK government and the Norwegian government about how we clean up facilities, and we need the records associated with that to demonstrate compliance with that agreement. So can we move on to slide 4, please, Marta? I've touched on some of this, and you can see on the left-hand side of the diagram, I've indicated information governance. That's the program I'm managing, and it covers information management in green. That's the document. Knowledge management, which is in our heads. Intellectual property, and making sure that we do not breach any copyright issues or that we don't inadvertently sell somebody else's information, or somebody else makes capital or money out of our information. We've got to manage that. In the bottom left, information risk management. Because we're in the nuclear industry, we have significant security requirements that we have to comply with, which overlays your normal risk appetite. It's no risk appetite to losing information or losing control of that information, and how much do we put into that. And then we've got information technology, which is IT. So that is what the program I manage covers. I'm just going to focus now on slide 5, Marta, information management, which is just one of those. So you can see, if you look across the bottom in the blue, Nadal, which is NDA Archives Limited, it's a subsidiary of NDA, and we have an operator in there, which is a company called Restore Digital. Gordon, who's going to be on after me, works for Restore, and they operate the archive for us. And they operate it under a commercial arrangement. We have approximately 107 staff associated with delivering this archive, so it's a big undertaking. The blue diagram, you can see I've broken it down into effectively the items of work that we've got there. So on the left-hand side, there is the building, which I call the library, and that is the nucleus facility itself. And under that, I've identified through a dotted line physical records, because through this facility, we are also managing records stored in other facilities around the UK. And I mean things like physical objects, some of which are radioactive, and we can't obviously move them from the sites they're located at. So there is effectively, it's what we call a hub and spokes model. So the hub is nucleus, and we have all the spokes out to the physical records around the estate. The commercial partner or librarian is Restore Digital, and they're managing the facility for us. We've provided a whole load of rules and a record retention process about how we will manage this information, and Gordon will touch on some of that, and these are available all on our website. Then on the right-hand side, estate records. This is what I class as the books. In other words, we're looking to the estate to lodge their records within our facility. To give you an idea, in 2015, when we started, we have records going back to the 1940s, and we have approximately 400,000 boxes of paper records. On top of that, we have a multitude of electronic records held in different electronic databases, and we have in excess of 3,000 old-fashioned reel-to-reel films, from the 1940s and 50s, together with thousands of modern videotape films as well. We also have oral history, so we have a significant amount of oral records as well within the archive. And the objective is to take those 400,000 boxes, slim them down to around about 100,000, index them and put them into the archive so that we can use them. That's step one with the paper, and then we'll move on to digital, and I'll cover that in towards the end. So slide 6, Marta, please. So that's a picture of the facility in winter in Wick, and you can see, yes, it does get snowy up there. So some of you from Norway will recognise that kind of landscape. It's a very long way from Wick to other parts of the UK, around about 700 miles from the north of from Wick down to some of our southern sites. So the building, by the way, has won numerous architectural awards all around the UK. Slide 7, Marta. Inside there we have numerous pods like this, now with records now going in there, and I'm being a bit circumspect about how much we have because we do carry very highly classified records, so there's certain things that I can't really say about the facility, but that's what we have inside, numerous pods like that. Slide 8, please, Marta. That's the entrance to the facility, and we host the local archives as well. And this entrance is open to the public, so the public can come into the front end of the building to look at the local archives, and shortly, and when I say shortly, probably 12 to 24 months away, we'll start making the nuclear records available as we get our access under greater control. Slide 9, Marta, please. That's the entrance to the archive facility, and you can see that was just literally before we opened because there's nothing in it. And slide 10 now, please, Marta. I've touched on this slide. I'm just going to give you a bit of an overview of where the material comes from. This is Sellafield in Cumbria in England, and this is our big reprocessing facility. This facility has the highest concentration of radiation anywhere on the planet in a 1.5 square mile facility. And our job as an organisation is to decommission that, and everything you can see on that slide 10, we have to take down and put into a box. And that box, so everything you can see there is waste. Move on to slide 11, Marta. This is inside one of those facilities. This is a cooling facility. Thorpe stands for the Thermal Oxide Reprocessing Plant. And what you can see in the water are containers with nuclear fuel being cooled before we reprocess it. When we reprocess it, it is split into various components, and basically uranium, plutonium, and effectively a liquid waste. And we actually encapsulate that material and bury that material. So those drums that you can see in the bottom of that pond get reprocessed, and currently, I'll show you some drums in a minute, we have 75,000 drums of waste to date, and we will expect to get to between 300 and 400,000 drums of waste. And each one of those drums has around about 800 individual documents that tell you what's in that drum, where it came from. And so you can see we have a tremendous problem in terms of indexing all those records from the 1940s in various media formats, and to keep those records available for use for at least 300 years, and after that 300-year window, a smaller set of records available for thousands of years. And we've not worked out how to do that bit yet. We can move on, Marta, to slide 12. This is a store. You can see it's a uranic store. You can see those containers there. They contain uranium oxide, and we have around about 50,000 of those drums. You can see that facility, it goes on and on and on. And each one of those drums has a record set of about 800 documents detailing it. That gives you an indication of the size of the problem we have with records. Slide 13, please, Marta. This is the most interesting. When I said we have 75,000 drums of waste, that's what these are. Each one of these drums, again, has about 800 paper documents that go with it. And these are classed as intermediate level waste drums. You can't go near these. It won't do you any good. You have to handle these remotely, basically robotics. So we have robots that handle these. And some of these drums, you put them as they are into a store, as they stand, or some of them you can put into what we call an overpack. And if we move on to slide 14, Marta, you can see that's inside a store, what's called an ILW store. Trouse stand is a facility called Tresfynydd, a small village in North Wales, in the mountains in North Wales. And in each side of one of those concrete blocks under the yellow crane, we have 16 waste drums inside of there. So you can imagine how big the facilities are when we say we've got 75,000 of these. The idea is they stay in this building for around about 100 years. Then we take them out of the building and gradually start burying them underground over the next 200 years after that. So we have to keep records available and accessible with the right security levels to allow that to happen. And we get on to slide 15, my final slide. So what we have, how do we manage that? All of these, there's so much more information available on the government website, and Martha will publish the web pages so you can actually access them later. But we have a retention schedule in terms of keeping records. An interesting element in there is I keep the personnel records and medical records for people, such that if any of their children or relatives are damaged by any nuclear radiation, we can actually pay compensation. And 10% of those people were born before 1900, and I think the oldest we have is about 1883. We have his medical records such that we can fund any compensation payments to his relatives, offspring. So you can imagine the record sets that we have associated with people as well. The specification we have is called IMP 06. That's the Information Management Procedure 06, and that's on the website, and that tells you how we manage records. It is primarily focused on paper. Otherwise, I'd never have got this project off the ground. So we start with paper, and we're moving paper in. But my next question is, what about digital records? How do we do that? How do we preserve digital records for 100 years, 300 years? How do we preserve the archive management system so we can find those records, because that is now an electronic system? So that's what my next challenge is. And one of the simple questions I had is, where are we as an organization compared to other organizations across the world? So if you can't measure where you are, you can't control what you're doing. And that was the brief I gave to the Digital Preservation Coalition when we brought them on board. So I will stop at that point and hand over to Gordon, who will run through a bit more detail about the rules and tools we have. for running the facility, and then Gordon will hand over to Jenny Mitchum from the DPC, who we've engaged to help us determine what our strategy should be. But the first thing you do before you set up on your strategy is understand where you are, where you want to get to, and how you will measure your progress from where you are now to where you will get to. So with that, Marta, I'll stop. I think I'm just about on time.
Yes, thank you, Martin. That was fantastic, absolutely on time, and extremely interesting. I would say, unless there are super impelling questions, it would probably make more sense to go through the next two presentations and then collect questions at the end. But if there is anything extremely urgent that you need to ask Martin now, we have 1 minute to spare for that. Otherwise, Kolya, would you like to? I will stop sharing my screen now. And if Kolya, you would like to introduce Gordon, then we can proceed to the next presentation.
I will pass over to Gordon in a sec, just to say I think that was an extremely interesting presentation, and you really show the very difficult challenges of archives as an interface between the past, the present, and the future. When you say that the archives have to be, the records have to be preserved for at least 300 years in the future, that is really giving meaning to the question of long-term preservation. And when we look back 300 years, it's before the French Revolution, it's before the Industrial Revolution, it's before the oil and coal revolutions in the energy sector. So thinking forward where we might be at that time, really, I think, sort of illustrates the challenge of what you're facing, because we have no idea where we'll be in 300 years as a world society. We don't know which countries will still exist. We don't know anything about the technologies being used. So it's a very different challenge from other archival institutions and other information governance institutions. So on that, I'll hand over to Gordon Reid, who will be talking about the archive itself and the historical records that have been inherited by the Nucleus Center as it sets itself up. Gordon, over to you.
Right. So first of all, just to introduce myself, my name is Gordon Reid. I'm the archivist at Nucleus. And one of the key things, following on from what Martin has said and what Kolya has said, those of you who are archivists will be very familiar with the idea that once you establish an archive, a huge part of your job is simply trying to get the message across to the organization of how important record keeping is. So you have this real difficulty of trying to get people to understand, people who are doers have to understand how important record keeping is. And one of the things that's a joy to work with the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority is that they absolutely get that. In fact, you will understand that we're operating within a framework which is incredibly supportive and where a lot of the work has already been done. So Nucleus isn't an archive which is in some way trying to make things happen. Nucleus is an archive which is part of a solution, which is part of a strategy, which is already being developed. So what I'd like to do with this presentation is just focus on some of the key challenges that we faced and how we're going about things. So I'm going to apologize if some of this comes across as a little simplistic. When I was putting the slides together, it felt as if it's almost like a seminar on how to do record keeping in some ways, but bear with us. I'll try and go into a little bit more detail as we go. But what I will say is that if anybody's got any particular points they want to come back with, by all means get in touch with me independently, and I'll be very happy to talk about anything in more detail going forward. So the process that we've adopted, it applies both to paper and digital records, and it's pretty standard in terms of how you would go about trying to create some kind of an archive. So the first thing, as Martin said, is just simply to identify what records exist. How do you capture the metadata? So if, as Martin says, if you can't measure it, you can't control it. So what actually are these records? What are in these 400,000 boxes of records? So we start off by simply capturing the data, cataloging, listing, fundamental principle. And then we've got to try and appraise them in order to determine what their value is. And we're looking at this from two perspectives. First of all, we've got the industry. So the industry has created these records. The industry needs to keep some of these records for a very long time. So how do we meet their needs in the first instance? And then secondly, how do we appraise them for their value to researchers so that they will form part of a permanent archive of the civil nuclear industry, so that people for hundreds of years to come will be able to research and understand what the industry did, why it did it, and what the outcomes were. Once we've gone through that process, again, we need to preserve them, very simple, but this may not necessarily be keeping them in archive storage. Some records may only need to be kept for a short period of time. Some records may need to be kept for a very long period of time, but we need to preserve them in whatever format. We also need to make them available both to the industry in the short term and to researchers on demand. So this is where the cataloging is absolutely vital, because of course it's also the case that what a record says it is on the outside isn't necessarily everything that it contains. And you know, we've all got very used to searching through the internet using Google, using Amazon, where millions of dollars, millions of pounds have been spent trying to anticipate your research needs. So you can put in a question and you may not absolutely be sure with a search engine like Google that is giving you may not have got the right terminology, but the search engine can anticipate what it thinks you meant. And you can be very imprecise in your search terms and you'll get a good set of results coming back. But of course, with an archival database, which is straightforwardly what you put in is what you get out, you need to get that information correct from the very beginning. So you need to get the cataloging right in order to get the records produced as a result of searches. Martin touched on some of the other kinds of records that the NDA holds. And this isn't just simply paper records or digital records, but it goes into oral histories as well as core samples, all kinds of other materials. But one of the areas which I think is very interesting, while the nuclear industry is still very much a living industry, we can start to think about what is actually missing from the written record. So as those of us who are researchers and archivists will know, archives will only tell you so much. So are there areas where we can supplement that record? Can we find out information about a topic that will be of interest while it is still available to us, that will fill in some of the gaps that are supplied by the written record? So again, this is an area we're only just beginning to think about, but it's a really exciting way of viewing it, trying to think of the totality of the research needs of our community rather than simply looking at preserving the records of an industry. So some of the key challenges that we've faced, there are three I've come up with here. I could have come up with a lot more, but I didn't want to depress myself, so I've stuck with three. The first one is simply the backlog, and everybody will be familiar with this. There is a huge backlog, and the longer an industry has been going, the greater the backlog will be. So first of all, we simply have to come to terms with what all the records are. And this, of course, is not a fixed position, because the records are growing all the time, because it is a living industry. I'll talk about each of these in a little bit more detail in a moment. We need to ensure that the operational business needs are met, and particularly with relevance to the waste package records that Martin has mentioned, but also something which is crucial for the oil and gas community, decommissioning. These are records which will be required for a very long time. So how do we manage that? And then the third point, how do we actually set about creating an archive for posterity? Of all these many hundreds of thousands of boxes of records and digital files, how do we actually turn that into a meaningful archive? How do we make sure that the right records are kept? So, starting with the backlog, Obviously, the scale is vast. So there's records from sites all over the United Kingdom going back to the 1940s. There is a huge legacy here. And in anything that I'm saying, by the way, there is absolutely no criticism implied of anybody who's kept records across the industry in the past. We're looking at it now. It's always the way archives come in towards the end. You're trying to standardize something that was not standardized, but this in no sense implies that anything was done improperly in the past. So one of the key challenges we face, and it's not something I've come across before, but it's actually very difficult to standardize. Some kinds of records, invoices and expenses claims and so on are standard across any industry. But of course, there have been different nuclear processes happening on different sites. So it's very difficult to simply turn that into a retention schedule. And Martin has said we have a retention schedule, but actually I think we've got 6 or 7 retention schedules. And that's one of the challenges I would never have expected to come across, because different sites have different requirements. Many records are unlisted. Many records have already been listed, but not to the current standard. So we've got a huge unpacking job to do to simply try and say, now that we've actually determined through IMP 06 available on the NDA website, that is the standard for metadata, but records have been listed in the past, but they're not listed to that standard. So what do we do about that? And then you've got the final point is there is a variety of legacy data sets on a variety of very often outdated systems and software. So we have historical records and we have historical records about records. And again, this is all part of the challenge that we face in simply addressing the massive information which is out there. If we look at the next challenge identified was retention. And we've identified there that some of these records will be semi-current for decades or hundreds of years. So we know that organizations need to keep records for their own purposes. The nuclear industry's business needs are very long-term. And we've had discussions with the National Archives where they've rather wryly conceded that they will have to redefine what they mean by temporary storage of records when we're talking about 300 years plus, because this is a very interesting challenge. And in my experience, when people in any industry need a record, they usually need it in a hurry. So we need to be absolutely certain that in 298 years, if anything has happened, these records will be available. So the waste package records Martin has talked about, all kinds of information need to be preserved for them, such as where they were produced, how they were produced, how they were stored, how they were transported, what conditions were, all of these kinds of things for up to 300 years. And in information management terms, that's quite an interesting challenge, because you're talking about relational linking of chains of records. Decommissioning, again, something very familiar to the oil and gas industry. Some records will be required for decommissioning. This could be decades into the future. So maybe not hundreds and hundreds of years, but certainly decades. And again, there's a real challenge there, because normally when you look at legacy records, you would start to think in terms of how many of these records can we get rid of? How many of these records can we destroy? And then when it turns out that you're having to keep huge quantities of records on the off chance that they will be required, then you've got storage issues which start to back up. There is another consideration affecting the NDA's records, which is that, as Martin said, the NDA is an NDPB, a non-departmental public body. The records of the NDA and all of the other site license companies which it oversees are classed as public records under the Public Records Act. So they're treated as government records with all that that implies. And one of the things that that means is that you cannot just keep things because you feel you want to. It is part of the Public Records Act and subsequent legislation that you must review all public records, all government records, 20 years after they were created, You must decide if you're going to keep them, if you're going to destroy them, or you're going to put them into an archive. And you must decide if they can be open or closed. And if you wish to keep them and keep them closed, then you have to ask permission. You have to actually apply to the Advisory Council on Archives for permission to keep records closed. So again, as you can imagine, there will be a huge number of records relating to the nuclear industry, which you do not just wish to make public. But at the moment, as things stand, we cannot just simply say, trust us, we know you can't look at these, but we know what we're doing. We have to make a case. We have to, for every single one, apply for permission to keep it closed. The third challenge is to create an archive, which is part of the ultimate purpose of what Nucleus is all about. So, as we know, the research needs of an industry are very seldom the same as the research needs of academics or other researchers. Or, the golden rule of archive keeping number 3 is something like no record, once it finds its way into an archive, is ever used for the purpose it was created for. So we have to determine what we will keep. But we know we can't keep everything because there is just too much. And some of it is genuinely of no real historical value. So fortunately, the Public Records Act also provides us with a methodology. So there are guidelines on how to appraise records, how to select them, how to conduct reviews. You have to recruit a panel of subject matter experts known as consultant reviewers who will actually do the work of deciding which records you keep. And these will be people from the industry who will understand the nature of the records. They will be, generally speaking, physicists who will understand the chemistry. They will make the decisions in consultation with those of us who are archivists. So when the records reach 20 years, they get reviewed. If they're closed, you can only close a record for 10 years at a time. So all of the records will go through a review, and if you're interested, there is an operational selection policy on the National Archives website, OSP 57, which actually sets out which records you should keep for the nuclear industry. And we're revising this at the moment. It's only a guideline, but it gives you a good idea of the kind of thing. So finally, just to summarize where we are, we're at the very start of a journey that we know is going to last for hundreds of years. Nucleus has only just been built. It opened in 2017, as Martin said. But that in itself is an enormous achievement. And I really don't think we can underestimate this. To actually get the funding, the organizational buy-in to build an archive of the scope and size of Nucleus is a tremendous achievement. And now that it's there, and now that the staff are actually in post, we're starting to see a difference being made across the estate. So the records of several sites have already been transferred. Work has begun on processing legacy paper collections, and wherever possible, we're combining the processes of identifying the records with some appraisal. So if we can identify material that's historical, but doesn't need to be kept, then we're starting to weed those out at the moment. We have recruited a panel of consultant reviewers to start the SIFT process for the long-term permanent archive. We were hoping to have had them in post and trained, and then the coronavirus shutdown came, so that's slightly delayed. But we do expect that the selection of items for permanent preservation will start to happen this year. One of the things that the whole coronavirus is making us think about is how we change the way we work. And part of what goes with that is, can we do some of these reviews remotely? Does it actually require a reviewer to come up to Wick and be accommodated in Wick for several days to look at things? Can we do this electronically? Can we do this remotely? So that's something that we're starting to look at the moment, but we hope the selection of material for permanent preservation will happen later on. And then finally, just to say that we currently operate a scan-on-demand service to the various companies, site license companies that have sent us records. So when somebody requests for a file, it's one of the principles that wherever possible, we do not send the original out. we will send a scanned copy securely to the recipient. So this means that the integrity of the record can be preserved, but it has the very happy byproduct that we start to build up a digital archive of the records as we go, because as the records are looked at and they're scanned, those scans are preserved, and over time we will build up quite a comprehensive digital archive. But it is also the case that we're looking at digitization more broadly, and of course all of the considerations we have to take for records that are going to be available for hundreds of years apply equally well to digital records, as Martin has said, as they do to paper records, and in particular the cataloguing system and finding aids do as well. So as I say, that's all I was going to do. I apologise if this comes across as a little simplistic, but if anybody would like more information, I'll be very happy to talk to people at any time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gordon. That was, again, extremely interesting and inspirational. I will say, again, unless there are impending questions that cannot wait, I will give the floor immediately to Jenny Mitchell from a Digital Preservation Coalition. She can complete this series of talks about nucleus. Collier, would you like to do the introduction? Or we can actually go directly with Jenny, so we leave more time for questions later. So Jenny, I will now make you presenter.
Thank you.
And please share your screen at any time that is good for you.
Okay. Let's just start the slideshow. So hopefully you can see that all right. Marta, I've put my camera on, but do switch me off if I start breaking up a bit, because my internet connection is a little bit flaky, and I'm hoping that I last this presentation, and I think Martin Robb is also hoping I last this presentation, because he's primed to step in if it doesn't. Let's see how we go.
For now, we can all hear you and see you perfectly. So go ahead without any problem, and we will intervene if needed.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so my name's Jenny Mitchell, and I'm head of good practice and standards at a little organisation called the Digital Preservation Coalition. And I'm going to talk to you mostly about a piece of work we've done in collaboration with the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority, and it's a maturity model that we've developed called DPC-RAM, or the Rapid Assessment Model. And this is an opportunity for me to put in lots of pictures of sheep, so apologies in advance for that. So this is what I'm going to be talking about. So firstly, just a very quick overview about what digital preservation actually is, just to make sure that we're all, I guess, singing from the same hymn sheet. I'd like to take the opportunity to tell you a little bit about the Digital Preservation Coalition. Now, it's great to see that we've already got a little introduction in the chat there, so thank you for that. And then I'll focus on the main thing I want to talk about, really, which is DPC-RAM, which is the maturity model for digital preservation we've developed alongside the NDA. So what is digital preservation? So there's a definition here which is adapted from our Digital Preservation Handbook. I've got the URL there. I don't know if people have come across this already, but we have a Digital Preservation Handbook that's got lots of really useful information in about digital preservation. It's really, really detailed, interesting stuff. It's been written by lots of people, lots of members. And I think Neil Beagree's on this call as well, and Neil's been pivotal in getting this handbook up and running as well. So it's freely available online, so do take a look at it if you're able to. The definition here says that digital preservation refers to a series of managed activities necessary to ensure continued access to digital materials for as long as appropriate. And I've highlighted the bits of that statement that I think are most important. So digital preservation is never kind of a one-off activity or an ad hoc random activity. it's carefully managed, and it's a series of activities over time. It's all about continued access. So the reason we preserve things is so that people can access them either now or in the future. There's little point in preserving stuff if we're not going to make it available at all, ever. And it's all about preserving things for as long as appropriate. And Gordon's already kind of introduced this, so thanks, Gordon. So it's definitely not about keeping everything forever. It's keeping selected materials for as long as appropriate. And the next part of the definition there talks about beyond the limits of media failure, technological and organisational change. So I think when people think about digital preservation, they very much focus on the technological challenges, the obsolescence and the bit rot. But actually just as threatening to digital content are the organisational aspects. So, you know, if your organisation ceases to exist, what happens to your digital content? That's really key. There's a definition here from one of my colleagues, which is a much more informal definition, which just says that digital preservation is about putting common sense strategies in place to save a lot of effort and pain further down the line. So what does digital preservation actually look like? Hopefully many of you have already come across one of the key standards that we use in digital preservation, and that's the Open Archival Information System reference model. There's a very complicated diagram that goes along with that standard. There's a much simplified version that I'm showing you here that's got the producer on one side, so that's the person who's producing or creating the digital content. And on the other side, you've got the consumer, the person that's going to use that content. And then in the blue box there, you have all the activities that go on inside a digital archive. So that's what it's all about. That's what we're talking about here. I also like to do some, I guess, myth busting about digital preservation, talking about what digital preservation isn't. So it's definitely not just about backing things up. It's definitely not the same as digitization. So what digitization is doing really is just producing more content that needs to be preserved. As I've already said, it's not a one-off activity. It's not really considered to be a solved problem. So there's no magic bullet. There's no one solution to digital preservation. And I think one of the real challenges is there's no clear finish line. So if you hear people talking about things that have been preserved, don't necessarily believe them. It's not about things having been preserved, it's about things being in the process of being preserved. So this image at the bottom here with a kind of a clear finish line for digital preservation is perhaps a little bit misleading. Okay, so about the Digital Preservation Coalition. So we support our members to do digital preservation. We're a membership organisation, we're funded by our members, and we're led by our members as well. We're not-for-profit. I think we might be soon to be a charity. We've currently got 9 members of staff. So we were founded in 2002 in the UK, but we're now very much international in scope. So we've got international members. I think maybe about a third of our members are not from the UK. And we just this year opened our first international office in Australia. So that's quite exciting. I think we've got 103 members, but it might be 102. I have to try and keep track of this, and it's quite difficult. And here are the logos of many of our members, perhaps not all 102 or 3 of them. But I like to show people this because it gives a real sense of the diversity of the coalition. So although we started off with our membership being primarily the traditional memory institutions, so the archives, the national archives and national libraries, we quickly evolved. So we have lots and lots of universities that are members. But I guess more recently we've evolved into different, so we have banks that are members, and businesses like Unilever, Bacardi, organisations like the United Nations. We've got television companies like the BBC and I think Channel 4, perhaps. I might be making that up. And of course we have the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority, which is one of the members we're working most closely with at the moment. And one of the strengths of the coalition is in our membership. It's our main strength really, but in the diversity of membership. So we like facilitating conversations with people that come from different backgrounds and seeing where that takes us. So there's our mission statement. Essentially, as I said, we support our members to do digital preservation. That's the main thing that we do. So I'm going to move on to Deep Sea RAM now. So Deep Sea RAM is a new maturity model for digital preservation, and we released this in September last year. As I said, RAM stands for Rapid Assessment Model, and it's applicable for all organisations who have digital content of long-term value. It's really got continuous improvement at its core. So the aim is that it helps you work out where you are now in digital preservation, and it helps you think about where you'd like to be in the future. And we like to think about Deep Sea RAM as being a conversation starter. So as well as facilitating conversations between our different members, we also see our members using it to start conversations internally. So taking Deep Sea RAM and talking to their colleagues about it, particularly perhaps senior managers, budget holders, of course, and colleagues in IT to help them talk about and articulate where they'd like to be and what resource they might need or what support. So hopefully the URL for Deep Sea RAM is in the chat somewhere, but here it is as well. So it's just deepseaonline.org, our work Deep Sea RAM, and it's freely available. So you can go to that URL and you can download it and use it right away. But how did it come about? So it very much came out of our work with the NDA. We've already actually heard Martin say, if you can't measure it, you can't control it. So this was really what, I guess, inspired us to come up with Deep Sea RAM. So while working with the NDA, they were quite clear that they wanted a way of assessing where they are now in digital preservation, and also at the end of our project with them. So we're working on a 2-year project with them. And also thinking about, having a tool that they can use in the future, but also something that will help them to set goals, to help them think about where they'd like to be going forward. So as part of this project work with the NDA, we really didn't set out to create a digital preservation maturity model. And because there are already models out there, of course, we didn't really want to reinvent any wheels. But we did find that existing models were not quite fit for purpose for the NDA. And it often seemed to be the case that the maturity models that were out there were focused on a particular audience. So normally they were aimed at more traditional libraries and archives, or perhaps research institutions. And it seemed quite hard to apply them to a quite unique organisation like the NDA. So the model that we came across as we did our research that we felt had the most potential for the NDA was one that was published by Adrian Brown of the Parliamentary Archives. And he published it in this excellent book called Practical Digital Preservation, which is an award-winning book. And I recommend that you read it if you want to get an introduction to digital preservation. So we had a chat to Adrian. He was really happy for us to take the model and build on it. And this gave us a really quite flexible framework to work with. So although I say Deep Sea RAM as a new maturity model, it's more of a new-ish maturity model because it is built on something that was already out there. And we developed the model with the following guiding principles in mind. In particular, we wanted it to be applicable to any organisation of any size and in any sector. So not just the NDA, we wanted it to be applicable to all of our members and beyond, and to be applicable for all types of data, all content of long-term value. One of the other key guiding principles at the bottom there is we did want it to be quite simple to understand and quick to apply. So some of the maturity models we'd come across were quite onerous in terms of how long it might take you to get your head around them and understand them and sit down and apply them. And we really wanted something to be we wanted Deep Sea RAM to be quite lightweight. So what does it look like? Well, There's 11 sections of DPC RAM. I'm not going to work through these in any detail, but just to say that the first 6 sections are what we call the organisational capabilities, and these are the things that you need to have in place in your organisation in order to facilitate digital preservation. And then we have the last 5, which are what we call service capabilities, and these are the much more practical things, like the hands-on things that you might be doing with your digital archives in order to facilitate preservation and access. And for each of those 11 sections, you choose a maturity level. And that maturity level will be somewhere between 0 and 4, with 0 being minimal awareness, which I guess means that you don't really know that this is a thing you need to worry about. And at level 4, you've got optimized, which where you're doing something really well and you're doing it in quite a proactive sort of way. So you're kind of anticipating the challenges that are coming and responding to those before they even happen. So all you have to do is take each of those 11 sections and score yourself from 0 to 4 on each of them. So quite simple, really. And to help you score yourself, we've provided examples, at least for those top 3 levels. So these examples are really just to show you what that might look like for your organisation. So the examples here are for the organisational viability section, managed level, and we're saying that you'd expect to see some kind of commitment from senior managers. You'd expect staff to have the skills that they need to carry out digital preservation. You'd expect a dedicated core budget for digital preservation. Wouldn't that be nice? And things like staff development requirements are funded. You can produce reports about the digital archive to help inform your planning and management going forward. So these are just examples. We don't want people to use RAM as a tick box exercise necessarily. You don't have to tick all of these off, but they just give you a sense of what that might look like. And because all organisations are different, you might be doing something slightly different to this, which would also put you in the managed level. So how to use it? There's 2 steps really. First, you work out where you sit currently. And as with anything like this, we would encourage you to be honest and realistic. You're only cheating yourself if you're kind of putting yourself at a level higher than you actually are. There's no half marks. As I say, don't take the examples too literally. And the second phase is actually thinking about where you'd like to be. So again, we'd encourage you to be realistic. So not everyone has to aim for the top. Not everyone has to be looking at becoming optimized or level 4 across the board. It might not be appropriate for your organization based on your mission, your remit, or the balance of resources that you have. So we've tried to make it easy to use. So we're often asked, how long does it take to do it? We have designed it to be quick and easy. It takes quite a few of our members just an hour to do. And I think that does depend on you really knowing your stuff. So if you fully understand digital preservation and you know exactly what you're doing already, it could take you an hour to do it. In fact, one of our members, the record holder, claims to have done it in 20 minutes. So that's the one to beat. I think if you don't know your stuff quite so well, or if you don't understand the field quite so well, or if the information you're going to need to fill this in is spread across various people within your organisation, it'll take you a bit longer. So I'd suggest in the first instance setting aside an afternoon perhaps or a morning to look at it. So we've produced some guidance to sit alongside the model and also templates. So we've got a template available in Microsoft Excel. There's also guidance on what to do next. So if you download the Excel template that we make available, you can start to fill in your results quite easily, just selecting 0 to 4 from each of the sections. And on the fly, it will automatically produce a couple of visualizations for you. So this is an example of one of the radar charts that is produced. So the blue line here, the solid blue line, represents your current levels. This is where you are now for each of those sections, between 0 and 4, between minimal awareness and optimized. And then the dotted grey line is your target level. So this is the level that you've set yourself to as your aim or as your goal. And I think this is quite nice because it's a nice visual image that you could very easily take and show to your colleagues. So you could take this to your senior managers and say, look, this is where the gaps are. This is where we need to do a little bit more work. This is where more resources needed. You could share it with all your colleagues. You could even formalize it by writing a business case for digital preservation and including this information in there. So hopefully that's useful to people. And of course, doing DPC RAM is something that we consider to be the easy part of the process. It's quite quick and easy. The hardest bit is what you do afterwards, as ever. So we do recommend some things that you could do after RAM. So you could share it with colleagues. We'd encourage you to do that. Use it to start a conversation about where you are and where you'd like to be. Including it in a business case for digital preservation is a great idea. Using it to set priorities, thinking about which areas you'd like to move forward with first, and perhaps formalising that into a roadmap or a plan for moving forward. You could, if you haven't already got one, create a preservation policy or strategy that encompasses some of the things you've learned from the assessments. And the key thing is we'd encourage you to then repeat it the next year. So RAM's all about continuous improvement. It's about doing it and learning from it and moving forward and then doing it again to see where you've got to. So we encourage you to do it on an annual basis if you're able to. So as I mentioned, we're a membership organisation and there's particular benefits for our members around RAM. So we can help members complete their RAM assessment. We can sit and talk through it with them. And we tend to do this with new members when they join us. And we also encourage members to submit their results to us. And the reason for this is twofold, really. So it helps us understand our members, and when they come to us for support or advice, we can look at their RAM assessment and get a baseline understanding of where they are. Also, it can inform our work planning for the year as well. So we can decide based on the gaps that RAM's highlighted where we're going to put our resource and where we're going to put on training for the year ahead. It allows members to ask for anonymous benchmarking data. This is something that NDA really wanted. So they wanted to get a sense of where they are in relation to the rest of the membership. So that's quite a useful thing as well. And we only do this in an anonymised way, of course. And over time, of course, we'll get these statistics which will allow us to see how quickly people do move forward over time. But of course, there's also benefits for everyone. So it's freely available for anyone to use. Any group of organisations could use RAM as the basis for benchmarking or knowledge exchange. So you could do that within this forum even if you wanted to share your results and have a conversation about RAM. It's also worth mentioning in this forum that RAM is being translated into other languages. So it's not available yet, but we are expecting to have it in French and Italian and Japanese. So watch this space for that. So that's it from me. I just wanted to end by thanking the NDA really, because they've supported this model, the development of this model. We've been working on it in conjunction with them, and it's already benefiting the whole digital preservation community, which is a great outcome. So thank you very much.
So Tiffany, that was really, really, really interesting. I think you can stop sharing the screen now if you want to. And we still have around 15-20 minutes for questions. So I would really like to leave the floor to all of our attendees. Please do unmute yourself and turn on your camera if you want to, and ask a question directly, or you can write it in the chat if you prefer. Are there preliminary questions? See?
And I'd just like to add something to that one of the problems of not having the EOGAN conference face-to-face is we're not having the full exchange of people from different European countries and different energy sectors. So I would really sort of encourage people to share experiences of what's happening in other countries, share experience of the relevance, or thinking questions around the relevance of this for other energy sections, not just the nuclear energy sector. That's not meant to be pressure on anyone, but if people would like to, I think that could be very interesting.
Yes, thank you, Colin. Of course, not just questions, but suggestions, opinions, comments of any kind would be absolutely welcome here. Anyone who wants to go, please just unmute yourself. Otherwise, I will have a couple of preliminary questions just to get things started. Anyone having a question? Okay, then I will just get into my role as external energy. Okay, oh please, sorry. Can't really keep it. If there is any, please just start talking. I can only hear someone unmuted themselves. Sorry, but please just start talking.
Do you want me to speak? Sorry.
Oh, is it Andrew? Hi, Andrew. Yeah, sure, please.
Hi guys. Hi, it's Andrew from Aberdeen University. Thanks so much. I think it's fantastic to hear what's happening with the nuclear records. You might find my names on some of them because I used to work at Dounreay, but I'm so delighted, and I think it's a real success story. I'm obviously working with oil and gas records and trying to get companies to do what they're told. What's good for them is proving very difficult. So it's so fantastic to point them to this example where, you know, you've created an archive, you've got full buy-in. I know it's different with public records, but and the Digital Preservation Coalition, obviously, we look to them as an archive sector, and we're trying to get our university to play ball as well. So fantastic that you're involved with them as well. So really just a point to say, it's a shame we can't meet you personally all, but fantastic presentations, and I think I'd be delighted to look forward to see what's coming up. I've been speaking about the nuclear industry to lots of the oil and gas people, and they're so impressed at what's been achieved in such a short time, actually, and hopefully we can do the same for the oil and gas industry.
Marta, it's Martin Robb here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you well.
Yeah, I would say, to build on what was just been said, we do actually sit on the information management group with the oil and gas industry from the UK, and we are potentially in a position to offer our services to the oil and gas industry in probably 2 to 4 years' time, once we've got a handle on having dealt with our legacy. So there may be some further interaction coming on along this line in the future. It's always an option. It's always been an option in our business case to offer the services more widely for the benefit of the UK taxpayer. So basically, watch this space. No promises, but watch the space.
Thanks. And I will have two quick or non-quick questions, actually, more or less for all of the speakers. The first one, I will act in my capacity of energy historian, and I will really ask if you could give a few more details about how it's possible to access the archives for history research, and what parts of the archives are already available. We touched upon it, Gordon and Martin, in your presentation, but just to get an idea, what are the collections that are already available? And the second question is whether there are plans that you're creating as it goes along, digital records, whether you're planning to put them freely online available, perhaps by creating a portal or something like that.
Do you want me to answer this, Gordon?
Oh, I think so.
Right. Okay. The easy glib answer is, it is our intention to make the archive management system available to the public, so the public can actually search and pull up and identify the records that they're looking for, and ultimately be able to pull them up themselves digitally. That's the aim. Clearly, we're not there yet. So, give you an example. I can't give you an exact time frame, but I'm talking in probably 12 to 24 months we will start to be in a better position. Our electronic records management system won't be going online until probably September. We've had obviously some delays with COVID that's pushed it back. Once we've got that online, it means that internally we can actually look at the records and find them. There is no problems whatsoever with people putting requests in through freedom of information, but that's a bit clunky. So you can do that now, but it's a very clunky system, and we are moving to make them more freely available. The only collections that we currently have in are the old United Kingdom Atomic Energy Authority records, which are the old research bodies, and we do have. And again, they could be available. We'd have to make the problem we have to do is check them from a security point of view. So that could slow us down because the security classifications have changed significantly over the last 50 years. So we do have to check to see if something was marked secret in the 1960s. Is it still secret? Has it gone up in classification or has it gone down? And that becomes a bit difficult. But that is our aim. So you can access some of those now. Theoretically, the 3,000 plus reel-to-reel films from the 1950s to present are available. The only problem is I've got to effectively preserve them, repair them, and then digitize them before I can make them available because they're in a very poor condition, some of them. So in short, the vision is, yes, you should be able to access nearly everything. When will that be? It will be in it'll gradually get there, starting probably in about 12 months' time. But you could access something today under an FOI, Freedom of Information Request.
Can I just add to that it's also going to be the case that records that have gone through the review process and have been selected for permanent preservation will go on to the National Archives Discovery website. So they already have all of the records of the nuclear industry that are publicly available listed on their website, and we will continue to add to that. So to a certain extent, the National Archives will also serve as a one-stop shop for a catalogue of all of the records. As Martin says, none of the records have yet gone through that process that we've received. And that process is going to start this year and will start to come online. So we hope records will then start to be made available, probably next year onwards.
Thank you very much. It's very interesting to see that it's not going to be 300 years, but only 12 months. And this is absolute a goldmine of an archive. So I can really see many researchers wanting to jump on it, so to speak. We still have a couple of minutes for other questions. So if there is anyone else who would like to speak, let us know. Otherwise, I will just, please feel free to interrupt me anytime, but I will just start to saying, first of all, Colin Bouncing to organize these, but also, of course, our fantastic speakers. It was extremely interesting. Hopefully, it will also serve as a sort of teaser of what we do at EOGAN, of the conference that we will organize next year, hopefully not online, but in person at the archive, so we can also see the beautiful building from the pictures in person. And Radwan Munechiv as well was a co-organizer, and I didn't introduce him in the beginning, and I apologize for that. And of course, to all of you who appeared, there was a fantastic turnover. We didn't lose almost anyone along the way, so hopefully there weren't technical issues, which is great, because I'm sure since the presentations were so interesting, no one left because we weren't listening. That said, if there are no extra final questions, I will just say if the registration for this webinar will be made available over the next few days on our website, both on Archives Portal Europe and on EOGAN. I hope we can circulate the PowerPoint presentations as well without problems, again, on our website. And we will be in touch via email if you want to subscribe to the EOGAN newsletter, the Archives Portal Europe newsletter, the Digital Coalition newsletters. I'm not sure if Nicholas has a newsletter, but you will receive a request to join if you want to. We try to be both GDPR compliant, but also open to keep this network going. And Collier, Radwan, or Gordon, Jenny, Martin, is there any final remarks that you would like to make?
The only one was thank you very much for your attendance and for listening. I just apologise, I was only on the phone. There's some websites that have more information, and if you contact Marta afterwards, she'll be able to share the government websites where you can actually find out more if you want to. We
will circulate all the relevant links that were mentioned. So no problem about not being able to take notes right now, but that's absolutely no problem.
Yeah, just to say it's great to have the opportunity to talk to a completely different audience. So really appreciate the invitation, and thank you to everyone for coming along.
And I think I can speak for all of the archivists here. We thank you for the invitation to check out the material that is produced by the Digital Preservation Coalition, which looks extremely interesting to whoever works with records nowadays, whether paper-based or digital form material. So thank you for coming. Any final?
I'd just like.
Please, Kolja. Kolja, do you want to intervene?
Yeah, I'd just like to again thank everyone, and I'd also like to say we're not sure as AOGAN exactly whether we will be sort of having more webinars or not in this period, because we really don't know how long the situation will go on. But if people have ideas that they think would fit well with the network, we would very much like to hear from people if they have ideas of what their own institutions or organizations are involved in, and if that might be good material for another webinar at some point in the future. That would be extremely interesting to hear from you.
Yes, thank you. Absolutely. If there is anyone who would like to contribute to keep the conversation going, we would be more than happy to make this sort of regular webinar series, since our testing in quote went so well. So, okay, I think if there is no one final point, I think we can say bye for now, but we will be in touch very, very soon. Thank you again to everyone. I know it's a little bit awkward online because you cannot really break a conversation and continue it over coffee and biscuits, but hopefully we will be able to do that very soon, and at the latest next June. Let's see, more or less next June in a week directly. So I will in a few seconds now probably nuke this very big group by clicking on leave. But thank you very much to everyone for joining, and we will be in touch very, very soon. Thank you very much to everyone for coming.
Thank you very much, everybody. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.